Before we begin, do something strange for a true crime story. Take a second, hit subscribe, leave a like, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from tonight, because this case proves something terrifying. Sometimes the most dangerous place isn't a dark alley or an empty highway. Sometimes it's home. December mornings in the quiet town of Redwood Valley always started the same way: cool air, fog drifting across suburban streets, and the distant sound of delivery trucks heading toward the highway. Emma Collins loved mornings like that. She was 27, 6 months pregnant, and the kind of person who made neighbors feel comfortable just by waving at them from the driveway. Every afternoon after work, she walked the same path past the lake trail behind her neighborhood. Doctors had recommended light exercise during pregnancy, and Emma followed the advice carefully. Routine mattered to her. So when Emma didn't come home from work on a Tuesday evening, the silence inside her house felt wrong immediately. Her husband, Ryan Collins, noticed first. At 6:47 p.m., he called her phone. No answer. At 7:02 p.m., he called again. Still nothing. Emma always answered. By 7:30 p.m., Ryan was pacing the kitchen floor, staring out the window at the empty driveway. Her car wasn't there. Her phone kept going straight to voicemail. At 8:11 p.m., he dialed 911. "My wife didn't come home from work," Ryan told the dispatcher. His voice sounded tight but controlled. "She's pregnant. This isn't like her." Police officers arrived within 20 minutes. At first, it seemed like a typical missing person report. Adults sometimes stayed out late, lost their phones, or forgot to check in. But when officers asked basic questions, small details began stacking up in strange ways. Emma had left work at 5:02 p.m., confirmed by security cameras at the marketing firm where she worked. Her car was supposed to arrive home by 5:25 p.m. It never did. Detective Laura Bennett joined the case that same night. She had worked missing persons investigations for over a decade, and she understood how quickly those first 24 hours could decide everything. Her first stop was Emma's office. The building's security footage showed Emma leaving the lobby exactly on schedule, wearing a gray coat and carrying her laptop bag. She smiled briefly at the receptionist before stepping outside. Then the cameras lost her. No footage of her car leaving the parking lot. No traffic cameras capturing her route home. It was as if Emma Collins had simply stepped outside and vanished into thin air. The next morning, search teams spread across Redwood Valley. Flyers appeared on street corners. Volunteers combed parks, lakes, and wooded trails. Then someone spotted something unusual. At 10:42 a.m., a dog walker called police after noticing a familiar vehicle parked near the far end of Lake Pine Trail. It was Emma's car. Detective Bennett arrived minutes later. The silver sedan sat crooked near the gravel shoulder, driver's door unlocked. Her purse was still inside. Her phone was sitting in the cup holder. Even the keys were still in the ignition. Nothing looked disturbed. No broken glass. No sign of a struggle. But Emma was gone. Investigators searched the surrounding area immediately. Officers moved through the wooded trail with flashlights, calling her name into the cold morning air. No response. The lake surface was calm, reflecting gray clouds like a sheet of glass. Then Bennett noticed something else. Emma's fitness tracker was still inside the car, lying on the passenger seat. But according to the device's synced health app, it had recorded steps for another 42 minutes after Emma supposedly left work. 42 minutes after she was already home. Bennett frowned. That didn't make sense. Because Emma never left the car. When detectives showed the data to Ryan later that evening, he stared at the screen, confused. "That's impossible," he said quietly. "She always took that with her." The more investigators examined the timeline, the stranger things became. Emma had left work. She had gotten into her car. But the driving data recorded only 6 minutes of movement before stopping near the lake trail. That location was not on her normal route home. And someone had walked nearly 2,000 steps after the car stopped. But there were no footprints leading away from the vehicle. Detective Bennett studied the numbers again. The steps didn't head toward the trail. They circled the car. Over and over and over again. As if someone had been pacing beside the vehicle, waiting for something. Or someone. But the most disturbing discovery came later that night when investigators searched Emma's home. Her laptop sat open on the kitchen counter, and on the screen was an email draft she had started writing earlier that afternoon. It wasn't finished, but the single sentence typed at the top made Detective Bennett's stomach drop. "I think Ryan knows." The unfinished email sat frozen on the laptop screen like a message sent from someone who knew time was running out. "I think Ryan knows." Detective Laura Bennett stared at the sentence for a long moment. The cursor blinked slowly at the end of the words, as if waiting for Emma to return and finish what she had started. But Emma Collins wasn't coming back to that keyboard. Not tonight. Not tomorrow. And maybe not ever. The house itself felt almost painfully normal. Clean kitchen counters. A half-folded baby blanket resting on the couch. A stack of pregnancy books beside the armchair. The kind of quiet, hopeful details you expect in a home preparing for a newborn. Yet something in the room felt off. Bennett turned to Ryan Collins, who stood near the doorway watching the officers search through cabinets and drawers. "Did Emma mention anything about writing an email today?" she asked. Ryan shook his head slowly. "No. She didn't say anything." His voice sounded tired but not shocked. Bennett noticed that. Most husbands in his position were frantic, desperate for answers. Ryan seemed contained, controlled. That didn't mean he was guilty, but it meant he was someone worth watching closely. The investigation widened quickly the next morning. Digital analysts began pulling Emma's phone records, emails, and location history. Her co-workers were interviewed. Friends described her as excited about the baby and deeply committed to her marriage. No recent arguments. No sudden changes in behavior. But then the phone records revealed something interesting. For the past 2 months, Emma had been calling the same number repeatedly during her lunch breaks. A number saved under no name. Detectives traced it within hours. The phone belonged to a man named Daniel Ruiz. 32 years old. Local fitness instructor. Recently divorced. When officers arrived at his apartment, Ruiz looked stunned to hear Emma Collins' name. "Yes, I know Emma," he admitted, rubbing the back of his neck nervously. "She joined one of my prenatal fitness classes a few months ago." "Did you two communicate outside the class?" Bennett asked. Ruiz hesitated. "Sometimes." She asked questions about workouts and nutrition. Bennett placed Emma's phone records on the table. 22 calls. 17 text exchanges. Mostly during lunch hours. "That's a lot of workout questions," Bennett said. Ruiz exhaled slowly. "Okay," he said. "We talked more than that." The room went quiet. "It wasn't what you're thinking," Ruiz continued quickly. "Emma was scared. She told me she thought someone had been watching her near the house." Bennett leaned forward. "Watching her how?" "She said Ryan had been acting strange," Ruiz replied. "Checking her phone when she wasn't around. Showing up unexpectedly at places she hadn't told him about." "Did she say why?" Ruiz shook his head. "She just said she felt like she was being monitored." Bennett's mind returned immediately to the pacing data from Emma's fitness tracker. Someone circling the car. Waiting. "What was the last conversation you had with her?" Bennett asked. Ruiz reached for his phone. "She texted me the day she disappeared," he said quietly. He handed the screen to the detective. The final message was sent at 3:16 p.m. "Ryan asked strange questions this morning. I think he's starting to figure things out." Bennett felt the tension in the room rise. "What things?" she asked. Ruiz looked genuinely confused. "She never told me." The timeline began shifting in ways investigators hadn't expected. Emma had been worried about her husband. She had been contacting another man. And hours later, she disappeared near a quiet lake trail. The search expanded again that afternoon. Divers entered Lake Pine while officers combed the surrounding woods more thoroughly. But it wasn't the lake that produced the next major break. It was the neighbor. At 5:22 p.m., a woman who lived across the street from Emma and Ryan called the police tip line after seeing Emma's photo on the news. She said something about the previous night had been bothering her. Detective Bennett drove to her house immediately. "What did you see?" Bennett asked. The woman hesitated before answering. "Last night, Around 9:30 p.m., I looked out my window and saw Ryan in the driveway. That's not unusual, Bennett replied carefully. The neighbor nodded. I know. But his truck was backed up to the garage. The trunk was open. Bennett waited. And, she asked. The woman swallowed nervously. And he was dragging something heavy toward it. Bennett felt a cold weight settle in her chest. Did you see what it was? She asked. The neighbor shook her head slowly. No. It was wrapped in a large blue tarp. The detective's voice dropped. And Emma's car had already been found at the lake by that time. The neighbor nodded again. Yes. Bennett stared at the house across the street, her mind racing through the timeline. Emma disappeared around 5:30 p.m. Her car appeared at the lake shortly afterward. And hours later, Ryan was dragging something wrapped in a tarp into his truck. But the real shock came minutes later when officers searched Ryan's truck parked in the driveway. Because inside the bed of the vehicle, they found the same blue tarp, still damp, and stained with something that looked very much like dried blood. The blue tarp lay folded in the back of Ryan Collins' truck like a silent witness. Detective Laura Bennett stood beside the vehicle as crime scene technicians carefully lifted it into an evidence bag. Even before the lab results came back, everyone at the scene understood what it likely meant. Something violent had happened. And it had happened close to home. Ryan watched from the front porch, arms crossed tightly over his chest. His face had gone pale, but his expression remained strangely steady, the same controlled calm Bennett had noticed the night Emma was reported missing. When officers approached him again, his voice was quiet but firm. I want a lawyer. Within an hour, Ryan Collins was no longer just a worried husband. He was the primary suspect. The forensic results came back the next morning. The stain on the tarp was human blood. DNA analysis confirmed it belonged to Emma. The news hit the investigation like a shockwave. National media outlets began circling the story. A pregnant woman vanishes. A husband under suspicion. A quiet suburban neighborhood hiding something darker beneath its calm surface. But Bennett had learned long ago that evidence rarely tells the entire story in a straight line. They still needed to know what actually happened inside that house. The search warrant for the Collins home was executed immediately. Crime scene teams worked room by room, examining floors, walls, carpets, and furniture under powerful forensic lights. At first, everything looked spotless. Too spotless. Then a technician in the living room called Bennett over. Detective, you should see this. Under ultraviolet light, faint patterns began to glow across the hardwood floor. Small droplets. Wiped but not erased. Someone had cleaned the scene carefully, but the traces were still there, scattered in a path leading from the living room toward the back door. Bennett followed the invisible trail slowly. Step by step. It ended near the garage entrance. Exactly where the neighbor had reported seeing Ryan dragging something wrapped in a tarp. Inside the garage, investigators found another clue. A recently purchased power washer, still damp inside the hose nozzle. Ryan Collins had cleaned thoroughly. But he hadn't cleaned perfectly. Meanwhile, digital analysts uncovered something equally troubling. Ryan's computer search history had been partially deleted, but forensic recovery software restored dozens of queries from the previous month. How long does blood stay detectable after cleaning? Best cleaning chemicals for removing biological evidence. Police investigation timeline missing person. Bennett stared at the recovered list. These weren't the searches of a worried husband. They were the searches of someone planning ahead. The final break came from an unexpected source. Ryan's phone. At first, investigators believed he had erased most of his activity from the night Emma vanished. But phone systems often leave fragments behind in hidden storage sectors. And one of those fragments contained location data. At 10:14 p.m. the night Emma disappeared, Ryan's phone briefly connected to a cell tower near the northern edge of Lake Pine. Not near the trail where Emma's car had been found, but farther down the shoreline, a place few people ever visited. Search teams returned to the lake that afternoon with sonar equipment. The water was dark and cold beneath the cloudy sky. For nearly 2 hours, divers scanned the lakebed without success. Then the sonar operator noticed something unusual. A large object resting near the bottom. Wrapped tightly, Divers descended immediately. When they surfaced again 20 minutes later, the entire shoreline fell silent. Because the object they had recovered from the water was the same type of blue tarp found in Ryan's truck. And inside it was Emma Collins. The trial began less than a year later. Prosecutors laid out the timeline piece by piece. Emma had discovered something she wasn't meant to know. Her unfinished email hinted at it. "I think Ryan knows." Investigators later concluded Emma had been planning to leave him. Financial records revealed Ryan had taken out a life insurance policy only months before. Friends testified about subtle tensions in the marriage Emma had tried to hide. The jury listened to weeks of evidence: the blood stains, the internet searches, the hidden body. Ryan Collins never confessed. But the verdict came back quickly. Guilty. Emma Collins' story should have ended there. But years later, Detective Bennett reopened the old case files while preparing a lecture for new investigators. Something about the timeline still bothered her. Emma's email. "I think Ryan knows." Knows what? The investigation had focused on Ryan's motive. But Emma had been afraid before that day. Afraid someone was watching her. Afraid of something she never explained. Bennett scrolled through the old digital records one more time. And buried deep in Emma's recovered phone data, she found something investigators had overlooked years earlier. A second unsaved draft message. Only 5 words long. Someone else knows too. No name. No explanation. Just one final mystery. Left behind by someone who never had the chance to explain it.